So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final webinar of Hope Farm's webinar series set to celebrate our 20th birthday. Since October, we've been joined by farmers, conservationists, scientists, and others to talk about key practices we strive to demonstrate and research at Hope Farm. Looking back to 2000, Hope Farm took on the task of managing a farm, maintaining a stable business, and looking for ways that we can provide a home for nature as well. And I hope this evening, as in other evenings up to date, serve that purpose. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we get going. The session is being recorded and will be available to view after the webinar on the Farm Wildlife YouTube channel. As this is a webinar, your video and audio have been disabled. However, you will have full use of the Q&A box to put any of your questions in. You'll find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. So please post any that you have throughout the presentations, and this will be monitored by our colleagues, Sophie and Rebecca. We will then answer questions once all the presentations are finished when we come to the Q&A session. Please note that depending on time, we may not get through all of the questions, in which case we will get back to you after the event with a response. So we hope that the webinars to date have communicated that story of looking at habitat management in and outside of the cropped area on farmland together, alongside management of soils, cover crops, pollinator services, removal or at least reduction of insecticides, and demonstrating key ways that these can be achieved. Of course, none of these webinars to date have taken lessons learned exclusively at Hope Farm, as that will give a very narrow view of the agricultural world. To the contrary, we have reached out to experts in the field across these areas who we have learned from at Hope Farm to share with this audience. So a thank you already to everybody who is helping this evening and has helped to date. It's fantastic to welcome all of you from across the country and beyond. And I think it's fair to say that this webinar, as well as many others, have really given us opportunities to access audiences and diversities in opinion that we might not otherwise have been able to incorporate and include. So without further ado, I will go through why we're talking about the future funding of Hope Farm or future funding in agriculture and why that is important to us at Hope Farm. At Hope Farm, we've proceeded through the last 2 decades with the mission to research, demonstrate and share wildlife-friendly farming practices, but that in itself has changed a lot. To begin with, our aims were to maintain similar agricultural practices in the field, but take out marginal areas for production and use them for providing flower resources, pollinator resources, seed resources, and nesting habitats. Things like skylark plots were first researched at the farm. But as time's gone by, it's become more evident that 2 parts of the farm, nature and cropping, are not mutually exclusive, but entirely interlinked. And this ecosystem, it's so important to harness that power of nature rather than working against it to run a sustainable farm and a sustainable business with true integrated pest management in place. So here we've diversified our income, and with diversification comes greater complexity, but also greater spread of risk across the business. Our wider rotation provides opportunities to grow niche crops like millet that can be sold under the Fair to Nature certification scheme. Our countryside stewardship provides us with funding to establish skylark plots, wildflower margins, and all of those habitats. Other ways to reduce risk are optimizing variable inputs, so careful consideration on herbicide and fungicide applications, led by the expertise of our contractor, alongside the RSPB's aspirations for where we want to go on farm management. Building the soil's resilience is an ongoing challenge, but one that certainly helped to balance the books when it goes right under the strange seasonal conditions we've had in the last few years. Some of these decisions need financial support to incorporate into the business, and some just make sense. However, these are all opportunities that have worked under current financial structures in UK agriculture. Things are getting more uncertain over the next few years, but I hope that today may give some clarity on direction on how the farm business may work in the UK. We are joined by 3 speakers, who I'm looking forward to giving both an overview on the direction of agricultural policy and on-ground perspective on what this means to both arable and livestock farming systems. So without further ado, I will introduce Alice Groom. Alice is Senior Policy Officer at the RSPB, has worked in conservation for 10 years, mainly in policy roles, and is now working with the RSPB's policy department on environmental land management, predominantly in England. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Alice.
Thank you, Georgie. Sorry, just making sure I'm sharing my slides and off mute. So yeah, thank you, Georgie, for introducing me, and thanks everyone for turning up. It's really great. Can't see you all, but great that you're all there. Just as a little bit of context, just to set the scene, Brexit has, it is sort of presented lots of risks and opportunities to farming, land management and the environment. But the biggest opportunity is that of being able to make meaningful reform to agricultural policies. We know farmland is, home to a lot of our wildlife, but we also know that agriculture is one of the key drivers of biodiversity loss and many of our other environmental challenges. So meaning policy reform provides the opportunity to make farming part of the solution. We now have in England an Agriculture Act which underpins a new agriculture system in England based on the principle of public money for public goods. It also sets out a 7-year transition period over which time the current subsidies farmers receive will be phased out. This provides an opportunity to repurpose that funding to direct it towards environmental restoration and to reward farmers for the public goods they can deliver. Key to these reforms is DEFRA's commitment to develop an environmental land management scheme, and this is the vehicle for rewarding public goods delivery by farmers. DEFRA currently have proposed that this will have 3 components. So the latest information they set out in November in their agricultural transition plan. And these 3 components all perform slightly different functions and have slightly different eligibilities. This evening, I'm going to really focus in on the first component, which is the sustainable farming incentive, just because I'm trying to really make that connection between agricultural policy and Hope Farm and what we can learn from Hope Farm to sort of inform where that policy goes. But essentially the sustainable farming incentive is a scheme that's likely to be open to all farmers to pay for actions that help them manage their land in an environmentally sustainable way. The next component, or local nature recovery as it's called, is potentially a really crucial component to fund the management of our protected sites, to protect priority habitats, to expand habitats, enable farmers to work together, to do targeted species recovery work, and provide connected access to people living in the local area. And then the landscape recovery component is about bigger land use change projects potentially. So things like big peatland restoration and woodland creation projects to contribute to the delivery of a nature recovery network, but also to try and draw down carbon and help deliver against the net zero commitment. So DEFRA is looking to introduce a prototype of the sustainable farming incentive from 2022, so next year, which might cover aspects such as integrated pest management and soil management. They're then hoping to roll out a more fully formed scheme in 2024, and they'll be piloting from this year for 3 years, different aspects of that final scheme. DEFRA hasn't yet set out how the SFI, or the Sustainable Farming Incentive, can support a transition to genuinely sustainable nature-friendly farming. But there's really robust evidence that that is what we need. We need that transition to nature-friendly farming. And there's a growing body of evidence and farmer experience that demonstrates that nature-friendly farming can benefit productivity, profitability, and business resilience. So kind of win-win. So if the sustainable farming incentive is going to pay for nature-friendly farming, then we kind of need to understand what that is. And not just the RSPB and Hope Farm, loads of organisations, farmers and researchers across the country have been conducting research and using on the ground experience to really find out what this is. And the Farmland Wildlife Partnership has developed these kind of 6 key actions, which really set out like the really key aspects of nature-friendly farming. And key to ensuring that you're nature-friendly is taking a whole farm approach and making sure you're thinking about nature and the environment in every step that you're taking on the farm. So you're protecting and restoring habitats that are already there, creating new habitats, new wet features like ponds and ditches, but you're also thinking about nature and undertaking excellent soil nutrient and integrated pest management. And really crucial, there's this kind of magic number of managing about 10% of the farm for wildlife. So we know if you want to go from farm and wildlife declining, which generally declining across the country, to kind of turning that around and reversing those trends, then about 10% is right. So Hope Farm, we think, and the learning at Hope Farm and similar demonstration farms really provides a model for the sustainable farming incentive. We think it does. In the first decade, the farm demonstrated its core purpose of profitable nature-friendly farming by introducing habitats back onto the farm, ensuring a diversity of habitats and that they're well managed. Now what we're looking at is testing nature-friendly agronomic practices, so ensuring that whole farm approach, but without taking any further land out of production. We think this can really inform the sustainable farming incentive, so getting that melding of sustainable agronomic practices and environmental land management to deliver public goods from a profitable farm. But the key is to set the ambition high and to pay for change. So it's really crucial that the SFI, or Sustainable Farming Incentive, can help as many farmers achieve that sort of 10% figure, which is critical. And it's also critical that that 10% is made up of a diversity of habitats that are connected across the farm. These photos are from Hope Farm, and they just provide some of the examples of habitats that we've got out on farm. The other thing is quality. And it's another thing that DEFRA should consider is how to incentivize quality. Here are 3 pictures at Hope Farm. They're all wildlife, wildflower habitats, but they're not, all of equal excellent value for wildlife. The first picture is a really basic countryside stewardship mix, which is good, but the final picture is really the best, a really good diverse seed mix, and that's providing a range of pollen and nectar resources. But it costs more to buy those seeds and to manage that habitat. So DEFRA could look at things like results-based payments and the provision of advice to help people to really deliver that quality of habitat. Now, Georgie mentioned, and I mentioned just a minute ago, that we're looking at nature-friendly agronomic practices and taking that whole farm approach. So we've been testing a lot of ways to reduce carbon emissions, improve soil management, reduce our reliance on things like pesticides and artificial fertilizers. Now, it doesn't make sense for DEFRA to fund all sustainable agronomic practices because some of them are just good practice. They're sort of things that should be business as usual, and they make sense just to do them. So the picture here is a field at Hope Farm, and we introduced contour ploughing onto this farm many years ago because it made sense, it reduced time and helped improve the soil. And this is one of the activities that DEFRA is suggesting could be funded through the Sustainable Farming Incentive, but it wouldn't really deliver great value for money. Although it's something that all farmers should do, it's something that doesn't necessarily need incentivizing. However, ELM and or the Environmental Land Management Scheme, or in particular the Sustainable Farming Incentive, could support the adoption of measures that go above business as usual practices that help deliver public goods. So also on this field, we've been doing things like testing cover cropping, but there are other aspects that DEFRA could consider funding, such as, you know, introducing herbal layers or supporting the adoption of genuine integrated pest management. So I think the key lesson from Hope Farm for you know, future funding schemes is about setting the level of ambition high. Hope Farm demonstrates that with that high level of ambition, you can transform conventional farming systems to deliver environmental public goods, things like improving nature, reducing your carbon emissions and improving soil health, whilst maintaining or even improving yields and profitability. If you set the ambition low, however, this will just lead to tinkering. A problem that we've had with previous agro-environment schemes is that they sort of, rather than tackling the systemic issues and ensuring that we have you know, whole farm approaches and nature-friendly farming, they generally sort of tinker around the edges against a backdrop of continuing unsustainable practice, which is not what we need to sort of tackle the nature and climate crisis. So is the new Environmental Land Management Scheme on track to transform the way we farm and manage land and to deliver those public goods? Well, the short answer is no, which sounds really negative, but I'm not going to go into real detail why, but just some real high level points is that DEFRA has yet to really set out what ELM's role is in contributing to the delivery of the government's environmental priorities. It hasn't set out the contribution, and we know that ELM needs to really contribute, as 70% of the land is farmed. And we've been noticing this sort of waning ambition. So, for example, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, rather than really focusing and ensuring that ambition's high, like I said in terms of the model for Hope Farm, they are planning to pay for things that are more like business as usual and just tinkering, and that's really problematic. So DEFRA isn't really on track, but they are at risk of sort of reinventing the wheel and just, which would be a really poor deal for nature taxpayers and farmers. But we still have time, and it's essential that we sort of seize that time to reinvigorate ELM and make sure that, you know, it delivers Hope Farms across the landscape, and the other components work really well to deliver for nature and climate and for people, and to ensure that the Environmental Land Management Scheme delivers against the really ambitious vision that DEFRA set out in Health and Harmony back in 2018. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Alice. I thank you already for the answers that are coming in. And thank you, Alice, for setting out some key things that are going on in DEFRA at the moment. The use of Hope Farm, I think it's worthwhile saying that this isn't to say that what Hope Farm is doing is, in terms of land management, is extraordinary compared to some of the other amazing wildlife friendly farms that are out in the country as well. But we do have, it's really handy for us to have that wildlife monitoring and things, just to really show what a difference this kind of management makes for wildlife. And if this kind of management is incorporated on a landscape scale, what kind of a difference it can make for wildlife across the UK and beyond. I look forward to now introducing Martin so that he can set the scene from another perspective, from a farmer's perspective and a Nature Friendly Farming Network UK Chair's perspective, before we kick off the Q&As in about 10 minutes time. So Martin is UK Chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, as I've already said. He is also our contractor at Hope Farm for the environmental habitat management and for the cropping. We work on a shared farm agreement with him. And so it is really useful to have the experience of, or his lifetime of experience in wildlife friendly farming, and coupling that with what we want to do and what we want to achieve in terms of sustainable and wildlife friendly farming methods. He has been insecticide free on his farm for 6 years now, with around 1,000 hectares in total as part of his in-hand and contracting business. So without further ado, I will introduce you, Martin. Fire away.
And thank you, Georgie. So the network, Nature Friendly Farming Network, is a network set up 3.5 years ago, bringing like-minded farmers together across the UK to have a voice of championing how they are farming with nature and biodiversity alongside productivity. So I put a title up there, improving the farm's bottom line, biodiversity and carbon footprint of every farm. As farming businesses, the bottom line really does count, and we can show other farmers and policymakers why nature-friendly farming practices really do deliver the most sustainable farming business model, and as well as for biodiversity. So the focus from what we produce on the landscape is changing. So is the funding. Alice mentioned it was a subsidy. I think the previous old scheme was a subsidy. Then we've been in a payment for an area base. Certainly going forward, it will be a payment for a public good, delivering a service. It won't be subsidising it. If we need to really deliver it, we need to pay a fair, honest market price, but also have a fair market price for our produce. So in the past, it's only been about producing as much food, and the subsidy payment has been about increasing productivity and production, and only focusing on that increase in yield. But as we really understand and think about the whole nature and our landscape, and that better productivity will comes from balancing the two of sustainable farming and even regenerative farming, and about the outputs. And the more we focus around that point where we get the best margin and the most sustainable output, or the sweet spot in our business of using our landscape, but we need to focus on not just all the goods we can get, as in food, but all the other public goods that public want, and deliver those at the best return as we can get as farmers, but also as we can deliver for society. So as an arable farmer, I can use lots of data and technology to work out how I can deliver that sweet spot within each field, because every field is very different. So the images you have on your left-hand side is the data we capture. On the centre is the different soil types within a field. We can adjust the seed rates to counteract where we have good and bad soils. And the one on the very left is the nutrition we can place. We can actually put the fertiliser we need to feed a crop where we do need to put it, just where the crop needs it. We don't need to blanket use it. And the images on the right-hand side is the data comes from a combine. And the red areas are the areas that are poor yielding, and the green is the better yielding. So usually green is profit, red is loss. If we can't improve that soil quality and habitat, we need to be doing something else. And the future opportunity around public money for public goods and the model that's coming, that we can get funded to deliver habitat and other options in those less marginal areas. So as on our farm, like many farmers, the image on the left, we originally just buffered some of the edges, but as we move across and think about our productivity and the best bits of our land to get as much food produce or commodity produce from, we can square fields up, take those unproductive areas off, those areas around pylons, and just make the field more productive. But it's not just about doing options on the outside and around the edges. We need to take a whole farm approach, and how we can deliver increased pollinators that benefit our crops, how we can reduce our inputs so the whole field benefits and a whole farm benefits. And as businesses, many of our core costs have been maintaining the environment, and the previous payment systems haven't really benefited and helped us enhance and deliver that. So we got livestock fencing on the left-hand side there, but you could call it environmental protection fencing. It's stopping a farmer's livestock getting in amongst a hedge or into the watercourse, delivering public benefit and cleaner water and better environmental features. We can have bigger, bushier hedges that won't need to be kept tight against the edge of a field, because we're going to move away from an area-based payment to an asset and delivery mechanism of the asset you're delivering. So we can allow those hedges to become bigger, bushier, don't need to cut them so often. and really give that biodiversity across the landscape. And where we have ditches, margins and other features, we can allow those buffer areas to come and to make those wildlife corridors. And these will be incentivised and supported in the new payment structure that comes. So every farmer in whatever landscape they've got can get different income streams for the asset and the natural habitat and the biodiversity across their farms. So there's no public perception of farming, as we've seen, particularly in the last 12 months, farmers are really respected and the benefit of a really good sense of goodwill from the public, but this isn't just open-ended. They recognise the importance, not just for the food we produce from the landscape, but also the landscape, the heritage, the access and the environmental benefit that delivers for everybody. Financial aid for farmers is generally supported, but this isn't open-ended, and it's not just about giving farmers money just because we own an asset of land or manage some land. The public wants something back, and it's respected something in return. And I think this model, as we go forward into the ELM and SFI and the new model going forward, can really have this, we can communicate to the public around why supporting farmers delivering better environmental outcomes across a farmed landscape can actually be a reason why public money can be delivered to farmers to deliver those assets. But we also deliver high quality food, and we need a fair and open and transparent food market to get a benefit from that. That's it. I've just got to stop for a minute because I've just got a load of boxes come up. I'm sorry about that. Let me try that again. So DEFRA, our government, are coming up with loads of requirements for us. They've had an Agricultural Act. They've also got an environmental bill that will come back to Parliament, a Clean Air bill. All these different things government are driving will change our farming practices and make us, encourage us to incentivise us to farming a more sustainable way that has less impact on our landscape. In England, we're going to have environmental land management plans. In the other devolved governments, we're going to have a similar sort of structure using public's money for delivering farming and environmental benefits. Really, farmers are going to have to work in clusters to get the best value out of this. It's about working in a catchment or in a landscape area approach, not just for the scale of what we can deliver, but also for business benefit, because you can share machinery, share information about how things delivered. But also if you cluster together, you can offer to deliver tree planting or water management or other things to an open market. So the future is not just going to be about the public's money, but there'll also be private money coming in around biodiversity benefit and carbon benefit. Farmers are going to need some help to identify and record this wildlife. Many farmers have gone through an educational system only focusing on increasing production or animal welfare. And actually, as we go forward, farmers are going to really need to help to understand what else is on their landscape. And you can see farmers' eyes widen when you get a wildlife person or someone with some really interesting knowledge around birds, bugs, butterflies, soil health. And once that's explained to a farmer, their eyes open and they start to get to see how it all comes together and how we can have this centralized landscape plan of how we deliver a farming system. Engaging farmers in the environment can be tricky. We've often, many farmers have felt the environment's one thing and it's only about production. And as we get more understanding, it is about the two. Food security and food production will only come from healthy soils and healthy environments. And that's where the public can support in that delivery so we have healthy landscapes and soils. We also going to have to deliver climate and wildlife improvements. There's no point just being sustainable anymore. We need to be regenerative. We can't stand still and sustain the wildlife and the habitat that we've got now when we've lost so much. We need to put a lot of that back. Some of that can be done through farming businesses and from the farming return, but also some of that's got to come in from public support so we can really step up the delivery what we want, but it's doing the right action in the right place on each and every individual farm. Farmers are going to need to really help to understand these management plans they're going to need. It's a completely different kind of thinking, the way we move into a different farming support system and payment structure. And it's this transfer of information and knowledge that they're really going to have help with, but they're also going to need to contribute towards to get the best information for their business and their piece of landscape. It can't just be a free gift that here's the support. They've got to buy into it. We really have got to deliver on that biodiversity, the nature and the climate recovery. And also I'd say the pollution reduction. We see many incidents across the landscape, across the UK, of those pollution breakdowns where an accident's happened or something's not quite gone right. And the farmers really need to step up and deliver better for that also. So what does the future hold? We know we've got public support and public money coming. But as Alice explained, we're not very clear on the details of the transition. There seems to be very large gaps in the information, and as we transition from one system to the other, and many farmers are very concerned about seeing reductions in payment, but not sure in where the future lies or where they can bring revenue into their businesses. We've also got loads of conservation groups, animal welfare groups, dietary choice organisations, and other groups, all asking and demanding different things from our landscape. At the heart of it, we need a working farmed landscape, but in many places that would be a lot wilder landscape and a lot more nature, less livestock or less production of crops. But we need that balance, and I always feel we need the heart of a farmer in the middle of that to deliver the outcome we want from those landscapes. Climate change is really affecting our businesses, and we need to adapt and to drive down our carbon footprint, reverse the wildlife extinction, tackle some of those pollution problems. Some of that's going to be driven through government policy, but also we can drive that at the farmer level by thinking about how we farm different and in a more nature-friendly way. We're going to have that ELM scheme that's going to come in probably 24 and a sustainable farming initiative to feed us into that. And I say farmers are going to have to think about those revenue streams and think on a whole farm approach as an asset manager. Where do I get different revenue streams for different assets I can deliver across my landscape? Some land use, environmental net gain, green bonds, capital, natural capital is all new language to farmers. Many don't understand what all that means. But there's also new opportunities of where we do environmental net gain or natural capital. Farmers can be paid to deliver that. Where we see construction or infrastructure put in and biodiversity and habitat is lost, we can offer to replace that on our farmland and be paid to put additional trees in ponds, wetland area, and all sorts of things. And farmers working together can go to a developer or to go to a body or an organisation and talk at scale of what we can deliver. One of the biggest challenges will be the future trading arrangements. So we can, this may be it's got to be underpinned by fair trade in the food we produce, because there's no point having raising standards in the UK where the government just allows produce to come in from across the world with a higher, a worse nature footprint, carbon footprint, and offsetting and offshoring our environmental destruction in other places. We also have a challenge around devolved governments, where either side of a border on a line on a map, there may be completely different farming policies. And as a network across the UK, we're trying to hold that together. We want farming to work for everybody across the UK, and we need farming policy across the UK to actually do similar things and don't change one part of the country to the other, because that makes life as farmers really complicated. So short-term and long-term funding for nature-friendly farming. Farmers are really starting to think, where can they get some income from or revenue streams? So if there's any farmers who are not currently in a countryside stewardship scheme, really encourage them to get an application this year or next year. It's a great way of starting your transition into look at your landscape differently and delivering different things and getting some good funding, but also look at the capital grants within that application. There's some really good opportunities of getting some revenue streams for putting biodiversity, natural capital, those hedgerows, ponds, trees back on your landscape. Also separately, if you're not got the opportunity to go into a stewardship agreement going forward and you're already in one, there's capital grants available for fencing, concreting yards, spray stores, covering up muck stores, and various other things. So it's about looking at what opportunities there is to bring revenue in for things you may need to buy anyway, and getting support from public and the government in delivering those. We also going to have productivity grants to keep an eye out. So there's items of technology and machinery or animal husbandry and cattle crushers that we may need to be looking to buy in the next few years to improve our handling or our farming footprint. we could get some grants for some of those as well. So it's looking at all the opportunities to get that revenue streams coming into our businesses. There's many organisations that are either giving free trees or hedges away or a very reduced cost. And that can really calculate into our future carbon footprints and that ability to capture carbon in the future. So there could be a really positive role of where you add those into your landscape. For many farmers like myself, going down a regenerative route, putting cover crops in, moving away from soil movement, where can we bring graziers in? How can I work with other farmers to bring their sheep and cattle onto my farm to graze the livestock and put nutrition back into the soil and give me a little income while they're there? We know the Sustainable Farming Initiative will start next year, probably. And that's a new opportunity of giving some income in delivering those assets. And we've got Elm. And we're going to, we heard, I've explained a little bit about the biodiversity offsetting and carbon markets. There's future income streams for delivering those, particularly around the carbon, but we've got to get our own footprints within our own businesses, not just net zero, we've got to go sub-zero. We've got to get so low that we can sell the ability to capture carbon for others while they change their farming, their business practices. We also need better market recognition for the produce we produce from these farms and these farming systems. Not all food's the same and not all livestock management's the same, particularly on a global system. And we really back as a network the Fair to Nature mark, and we're really hoping that will come about, and see labelling on food produce that gives the consumer the opportunity to engage and buy from farms that are really stepping up and delivering for biodiversity, for carbon, and a nature-friendly way. And that was my last one, so thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Martin. There's just a few key things that I picked out of that, and it was the need to work together. That works not just for nature when you're working across farms, but for the business as well, to increase efficiency and connectivity. Same for the word regenerative, that applies to the farm business, soil, crops, but nature as well. And the need for clarity from policies and where things are going, but also the fact that there's a lot of new opportunities, looking at farmland, not just for the provision of crops, which it has been for many years, but for the production of all of those other services, and that there are a lot more opportunities coming in the next few years. So it's an exciting opportunity. So the next person I am going to introduce gladly is Christopher Price. So Christopher is going to be joining us for our Q&A session, but first of all, we will hear 5 minutes from him and his perspective on future funding in agriculture. Christopher is the CEO of the Rare Breed Survival Trust. He joined the Rare Breed Survival Trust in February 2019 from the CLA, where he was Director of Policy and Advice and had been working for that organisation for 17 years. So without further ado, I look forward to hearing a bit from you, please, Chris.
Start again. Thanks, Georgie. I'm going to respond to and maybe challenge some of the points that have already been made. Also look a bit at the bigger picture. As you'll have gathered, I don't have any slides. To my mind, power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. But let's sort of work through things starting from first principles. I think, first of all, we need to recognise that farming is a business. Farmers become farmers to produce goods that we want, food, to go and make money. And if we don't recognise that, we'll start off on the back foot. So on that basis, farming is pretty much like any other business. And there are people who would stop there. I mean, many of you will recall Peter Kendall, who was the old president in NFFN. He would have stopped there, for example. That was what I've just given is a description of farming to his mind. But I suspect most of you will disagree with that. That farming is not the same as other industries, particularly because of its very close relationship with the natural environment. Firstly, it depends on natural resources as part of its production processes. And secondly, as a land manager, the farmer has a far greater capacity to both harm the natural environment through polluting it, or to benefit it, such as through various approaches to ecological restoration. And I think, just as an aside, when I'm going to say, that's why I'm not terribly comfortable with the whole concept of natural capital that Martin touched on. In my view, nature isn't just a factor of production to be accounted for on a balance sheet in the same way that conventional man-made capital is. It has an intrinsic value resulting from the fact that it's not man-made. And so we shouldn't be treating it in the same way. We should just be valuing it for what it is. Anyway, another way in which farming is different to most other businesses is because it's made up of a large number of very small players. If you look at the contribution that farming makes to GDP, there are far more people involved than in other sectors of significant value. And a related factor to this is that there are many farmers, and I appreciate this sounds a bit disparaging, who are not very efficient. So taking all this into account, how do we achieve nature-friendly farming? Which I'm taking to mean both a healthy natural environment and a viable farming sector. Well, under the CAP, we had a go at it. We gave farmers lots of public money, subject to some conditions, backed up by fairly mild regulations, and we had a smaller amount of money that was devoted to doing public good. I think we would all accept that that didn't work terribly well. Nature is in decline and shows no real signs of turning around, and farm businesses are dependent on public payments. So the old way of doing things, business as usual, clearly hasn't worked. And I think we need to recognise quite how much needs to change. So what do we do if we want to have nature-friendly farming? Well, I reckon there's sort of 6 quick things coming out of what's already been said that can help with that. Firstly, we need to be giving vast amount of public money to farmers and land managers in amounts which is commensurate with the scale of our environmental ambitions. And that means having bold ambitions. As both Alice and Martin said, I think we should be worried about what appears to be a decline in ambition. What we're hearing about Elm does, as Alice said, falls far short of what was originally implied with the aspirations in Health and Harmony, the government publication from 2 or 3 years ago. What sort of features do we need? Well, firstly, I think we need clear objectives, and we need a budget that's tied to those objectives. As Martin said, the public at large do support giving money to farmers, but I think from a taxpayer's perspective, they need to have a clear indication of what they're getting for their money and see value for money for it. The other side of the equation is that the amounts paid need to provide a sufficient incentive for the farmers to adopt the sort of approaches that we want. You've probably had a lot of talk about income foregone, but if your income foregone is bugger all, then quite frankly, payment for income foregone is not that much of an incentive. You might as well intensify if you're going to bring the sort of money that you want for your family and your lifestyle. Alice touched on results-based payments. That's fine in principle, you're paying for what you get. But do remember with that you're shifting risk. The farmer becomes responsible for doing the thing that gets the payment. So if something happens which prevents the thing being done, the farmer doesn't get the payment, and they will want the amount of payment to address that element of risk. Martin also touched on getting money from private sources. I think we need to be relatively sceptical about that. We've been talking about this for what, 15 years, maybe longer. I really think if this was going to happen to any significant extent, it would have happened by now. I know that there's water companies who are paying hill farmers to reduce stocking densities to improve the storage and cleaning of water. But apart from that, it's hard to identify much that's happened so far. So I don't think it's prudent for anyone to think that's the way forward. Second substantive point, all of this needs to be backed up by regulation. Farmers should not be rewarded for avoiding doing bad. You know, the polluter does need to pay. That needs to pervade everything. Thirdly, as others have touched on, farmers, I think, do need some advice on how to spend the money to get the maximum benefit for nature and indeed for themselves. But I think when talking about this, we need to recognise the existing sources of advice. Most farmers already have existing networks, whether that's their friends, fellow farmers, such as through the Nature Friendly Farming Network, through the farming press, and never underestimate the extent to which farmers rely on that. And they'll have their own agronomists, etc. I think the point here is that the amount of money which is paid under the emerging schemes is sufficient to enable farmers to obtain the advice they need to deliver those schemes. As some of you will know, it's 20 years since foot and mouth destroyed large parts of farming. One of the ways in which the government responded to that was by paying ADAS to produce a report on every farm, advising on how they could become more efficient and generally improve their lot. And it was quite interesting visiting farms in the aftermath of that. You would see these reports on the shelves. In the farms that were super business-like and efficient and doing everything right, the report would be well thumbed. In those that weren't doing things so well, the report would be on the shelf since where it had been when it first arrived. The point I'm making here is that if farmers are minded to go and do the right thing, they will find the advice. If they're not minded to do the right thing, they will ignore whatever advice is made available for them. There's no point in government just creating a whole load of farm advisors, to my mind. As indeed I think Alice said, there is also a perfectly reasonable business case behind this. On most farms, if I would estimate that 10% of it, you're spending more on your inputs than you're getting back in profit. So when we've got elm on top of that, it makes sense not to produce in every corner of every field. As Martin said, it makes sense for farmers to come together as in clusters, both from a business sense with economies of scale and keeping down input costs, but also because nature works better at scale. There is an issue of farmers' ingrained individualism here. Most farmers think of themselves as a sturdy English yeoman. There's a cultural thing, but that has got to change. Fourth, there's other things that government can do to help farmers become more productive, become more efficient, and therefore more cognizant of the needs of nature without having to destroy it in the name of intensification. In my own sector, livestock, it would help if we had a more comprehensive network of local abattoirs. It would help if we scrapped some of the redundant rules on over 30-month carcasses. It would help if we had proper carcass grading so that the value of the meat was better recognised. It would help if we had more honest labelling so that consumers knew what they were getting. There's a whole range of things that don't need to involve giving farmers money, but can help farming as a sector become better. Fifth thing, and probably one of the most important, just in itself, removing BPS will help a lot on this regard. Martin queried the use of the word subsidy, and I have a lot of sympathy with that. Maybe subsidy isn't the right word for BPS, but what is? BPS is a payment for occupying land. It has no targets attached to it. There's no basis for it. It's not hypothecated to anything. It's just money being given. The downside of this is it discourages innovation and discourages efficient resource use. But for example, in my own sector, livestock, it would help many farmers, rather than using continental breeds, which require extensive inputs, to use native livestock. These animals that are bred for a British landscape. If you use the right breed in the right place at the right density, you're cutting down on your feed costs, your vet and med bills, probably your housing costs. So inputs drop. Welfare probably improves because the animals are outside at the right sort of density. You can tell a nice story because you're low input, you're free range. There might be a sense of local connection you can exploit. So your profits increase as well. And this is just from moving away from thinking in a subsidized world. You'll also be helping nature as well. We spend a lot of time talking about the need to restore pastures and meadows. The reason that those pastures and meadows came about in the first place was because they were being grazed by certain breeds. If we bring those breeds back and they graze in the right way, then the meadows get restored. All of that is I would suggest, the natural consequence of getting rid of BPS. Now, of course, you'll say that there is a human cost to this, and the scale of what is being proposed is massive. So the final point I want to make is that we need to recognise that scale of change, and we need to address it. As a country, we're not great at massive structural change. You know, when we scrapped coal, the miners had an awful time of it. When we stopped producing steel, the steel workers had an awful time of it. You know, the best we came up with is putting call centres all over the place. We've got to get that better. We've got to help farmers get from where they are now to where they need to be, or get out of farming in a way that preserves dignity and a degree of lifestyle. So there you go. Those are my observations on what the previous two speakers have said. So I think back to Georgie.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was certainly getting conversation going with those points, and really interesting. And that intrinsic value of nature as well. I think appreciating the fact that as farmers, we are privileged that we have that land to work with, I think is really important. So without further ado, we do officially have 8 minutes left for the Q&A, but with some brilliant questions coming through, I don't think it's fair to limit to 8 minutes. And we will be extending the time of this webinar. And also just very briefly to introduce myself, as I realise I didn't do that. So I am the farm manager at Hope Farm, have been managing for 2 years and on the farm since the spring of 2017, having grown up on a small arable farm in North Essex and studied for my master's degree in zoology. So I am a bit of a mishmash of the farming and conservation sectors, but that is certainly not to say that they are two mutually exclusive enterprises, or not enterprise, perhaps the wrong word there, but hey, I would like to now introduce Martin and Alice back to the room, please, and also Sophie, who has been monitoring the Q&A box. And without further ado, I'll fire away, Sophie, with your first question.
Yeah, sure. So I thought we would start by going a little bit back to the beginning. So we've got two questions here, but I think they were supposed to be together. So is the 10% of land that you talked about, is that the cultivated area or the whole farm? And do we really believe that's enough?
Thank you for that question. And thank you, Sophie. I think as that relates to Alice's presentation, it's best to just head that in your direction.
Yeah, so thank you. So yeah, it's 10% of the whole farm, and that's really just, I mean, that's the ambition we'd like to see in the sustainable farming incentive. So that's a kind of as many farms as possible doing that. We'd then like to see the local nature recovery components and the landscape recovery components enable people to do more than that and to expand areas of habitat. So that might be on farm doing things, or it might be joining up across landscapes to ensure that there, significant areas of habitat are created and brought back into good management.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alice. Sophie, if we could have the next question from you, we'll go quick fire onto the next one.
Oh, scrolling. Oh gosh, hang on. I had it picked out. Do you anticipate large organisations, so food producers, etc., will move towards conservation grade type commodities to meet their environmental/climate obligations?
Okay, brilliant. I think that one is much more wider and open to discussion. I think everybody could have a point to ask on that. Martin has got his hand up first, so if we start off with you.
Yes, I think they will do, and they already are. Many of the food supply chains and supermarkets we've been talking to the last few months are really looking at their procurement footprint. It may not go down the fair to nature and 10%, but they're very conscious around the consumer pressure around their footprint of their purchasing of food. And I think it's a great opportunity to get them to step up and deliver proper, pure, good quality food on the shelf so the consumers can choose.
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely right. I think the more that we can put a value on this for what it deserves to be, that we're providing a home for nature and sustainability as well as producing the food, the better. Chris, would you like to have your input there?
I think that we're going to be moving into possibly inconsistent or incompatible directions. I think we've moved past the age of sort of peak supermarket when everyone goes to the same small handful of supermarkets and they dictate everything. Rather, I think we will be going to a more sort of niche, upmarket, high welfare, low environmental footprint type produce that we see through, say, Dalesford or Able and Cole, or those sort of people. Particularly, I think that's been the result of lockdown, of people have been using veggie boxes and meat boxes and home delivery type things more. And I suspect that people with higher incomes will probably be using those sort of people who will do all the right sort of things. But at the sort of bulk commodity area, I suspect it'll go in the other, or there is a danger of it going in the other direction, unless it's probably regulated, of being more intensive. I suspect livestock will disappear, but livestock will decline and we'll have fake meat type things coming in. But there will be that split going forward.
Yeah, and I think that is a concern. It's our responsibility to make sure that things don't go into antagonistic directions, and that kind of better, high environmental standard of food is made accessible to everybody.
So I didn't mean to imply that actually that fake meat was not, that does have certain benefits behind it. But with fake meat, it is still, that depending on how it's made, there are a lot of things that many people may not want to eat that can go in it. And you can end up giving huge power to the corporate bodies, which are the only ones capable of producing that sort of fake meat at volume.
Brilliant, thank you. Alice, have you got anything you would like to add before we move on to the next question?
No, I think give time for another question.
Brilliant, thank you. Sophie, if we could have the next question, please.
Yes, we certainly can. What is stopping all farms from adopting the sustainable practices that should be business as usual, but currently aren't?
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you for that question. Just personally, I'll very briefly comment before sharing it around the room. I think that there needs to be a lot of advice and support available to farmers, and incentives to, not necessarily financial, but to make these practices seem more achievable and more accessible. But Martin, if you would like to kick off with that question, please.
Going to be really a mindset shift within the farmers, but also within the industry. We've had a couple of generations now of focusing on an output model and training farmers to think in a way, and we've got to unpick that. But there are many great farmers out there and other organisations that are explaining and demonstrating to farmers the steps they can take. And the future is about harnessing that and really accelerating that learning experience for everybody in the supply chain and in the industry.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's kind of it in a nutshell, and as that was quite a sort of, although I'm getting eyes, I think Chris would like to add something to that. I beg your pardon.
So I entirely agree with what Martin said, but don't forget the extent to which BPS operates as a mechanism for maintaining the status quo. If you can make a reasonable income through not innovating, why innovate? When BPS goes and farmers are no longer paid effectively for just existing, and ELM comes in, it is that I think that will start the change in behaviour, particularly if ELM is sufficiently ambitious and well funded.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for that addition, Alice. I must ask, because I don't want you to be left out either, if you have something else to add.
No, that's fine, Georgie.
Okay, thank you. Sophie, next question, please.
Sorry, that button didn't work. There's a couple of questions that are sort of on this topic. So what is the strategy to get ELMS back on track, and who is pushing that forward?
Brilliant, thank you. Alice, if you would like to start with that and then open it to the floor for whoever else may would like to add to your answer.
So I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of people who are quite concerned about the fact that Elm seems to be off track. And so a lot of the NGOs and people like Martin and Nature Friendly Farming Network are trying to work really closely together where we can to, you know, have to really sort of reiterate the really important sort of rationale for the original sort of vision set out for agriculture reform back in 2018 and health and harmony. So there's quite a lot of work going on for those organisations to kind of really push forward. Now we've got the agriculture bill that sets the framework, that provides space for us to now sort of really concentrate on ELM and make sure that you know, we seize this opportunity. So kind of watch the space.
I'll just add quickly in there. I think from the minister down, they've been distracted through Brexit and other things. So the ambition isn't there. They've been distracted. But many of the stakeholders in the meetings we sit in are trying to slow this change down and are trying to caution about transition and change, where there's many stakeholders that really want to do that, rapidly transfer into a better system, but take the industry with us. And there's that battle of the difference. But we must change, and we've got to do it at a fair enough pace to allow the farmers to actually progress and get on with it, because time's running out.
Thank you, Martin. Chris, have you got anything that you would like to?
No, I agree with everything that's been said.
Thank you. Next question then, please, Sophie.
Yeah, so many good ones. Can you expand on the polluter pays principle and how that might affect farmers?
I'm going to shoot that right over to you, Martin.
So the polluter pays principle is those who pollute the environment or water course should pay to clear it up. Currently, as an agricultural industry, there's not much of that enforcement going on to clear up that pollution incidents that happen. Many other businesses in the wider world have to clear up their mess or their effect to the environment. So there should be, I believe, and there should be some pressure around, if you pollute it or causing harm to others, as an industry, you know, as a farmer, you should take responsibility for that. And we can adapt our farming methods in a transition, but there needs to be that fair enforcement and support, not just a rod of iron. Some things are a slip up and a mistake. Some things are purposely polluting, and there needs to be found that balance. It will cost the industry, but those who clean their act up, it won't cost them anything at all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martin. I am going to, not to put you on the spot or anything about things, Chris, but I'm going to head over to you just because I know waste from livestock can be both a brilliant thing, but then also a pollutant at the same time.
I agree with what Martin said. I mean, I think, first of all, we need to have less livestock. There's too much livestock out at the moment. That needs to be reduced. If you reduce the amount of livestock, it obviously reduces the amount of pollution being created. But otherwise, as Martin said, you should be responsible for the harm that your activity causes. You should factor the costs of those externalities into your business. I think most farmers do and get it right. The problem is with the free riders who aren't doing it and are leaving it to someone else to go and pick up the costs and undermining the wider reputation of the industry. In some cases, with diffuse pollution, it can be difficult to identify who the polluters really are. And that means you might need to go and take a more sectoral or geographic approach, but it's not insurmountable, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. If we move on to the next question, please, Sophie.
Yeah, so do you all value peer-to-peer learning?
I will pass a comment on that before handing round. That is partly what this evening's all about, is sharing what we've learned, bringing other farmers and people from the industry together to share with this audience. And indeed, I've attended, and I'm sure people here have also attended many other webinars which have been really useful. This year has been really tricky for a lot of reasons, but it has actually enabled an access to a lot of information in a way that we didn't deem as useful, perhaps, as now. But I think being able to open up the farm gates at Hope Farm and give an honest account of what's going on, why we're doing things, what works and what doesn't, sharing that with not just people in policy who can make change, but farmers as well, that gives us an opportunity to learn every time. I always look forward to having other farmers and opening the gates to them, because I often learn an awful lot, and I'm sure the same is true for Martin and others as well. So that's my experience of it, and I'd like to open the floor to anybody else who would like to add to that.
I'll just say quickly, it's key. As a farmer, you learn from other farmers, but you've got to have the right farmer to learn from, and you can rapidly change quicker. But you also need to bring expert advice in to top that up, because as farmers, we don't know everything, and we can use external resources to add to our knowledge collectively and find better solutions.
Brilliant, thank you, Martin. Has anybody else got anything else to add before we move on?
I think it's even more serious than that. All the evidence shows that farmers learn best from other farmers. Farmers have their own trusted networks, and I think that the challenge for government is to exploit those rather than trying to come up with some quick wins. I was describing, as we had after foot and mouth with ADAS being paid to go and visit everyone.
That's very true. I think that's part of one of the fundamental reasons why RSPB purchased Hope Farm as well, is so we could actually try and help to inform people in wildlife friendly farming practice from a point of experience, rather than just we knew what, in a lot of cases, what could be good for wildlife, but fitting that into a farming system in practice is very different. With that, I will, unless Alice has something else to add to it, move on to the next question.
I can't see Alice right now, but I'm assuming that's a no.
Next question, please, Sophie.
Okay. Okay, so this one, whilst I agree that Elm needs to maintain its high environmental ambition, do you think that there is a significant level of risk that if the sustainable farming incentive is too front-loaded and not accessible to farmers, especially those who haven't been involved in agri-environment schemes before, a significant amount of farmers could go more intensive and productive to make profit after BPS is gone, rather than joining Elm? How do we mitigate the risk of farmers being put off by Elm?
So particularly as the SFI was introduced in Alice's talk, if we could start off with your thoughts on that, Alice, before opening to Martin and Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a risk. It will be difficult to engage everyone, but I think it's still really important to ensure that ambition is baked in. I think government tried with entry-level stewardship sort of 10 or so years ago now to do that really easy, accessible scheme with the hope that you could then ramp up, and the evidence showed that it just doesn't work like that. So rather than the sort of lowering the ambition of the SFI, I think it's about the way government structures it. It's about the incentives that they provide and the support to ensure that it does make sense for people to engage in that scheme.
Thank you, Alice. So I'm going to ask for a very quick comment if Chris and Martin would like to on that, so that we will have time for one more question afterwards.
Payment rates high enough to make it an incentive.
And it have an enforceable baseline. Not everyone may want to join the SFI and Elm, but if there's an enforceable baseline of what you should be delivering for good land management, it makes farmers think about doing other things.
Brilliant, thank you. So could we have the final question, please, Sophie?
Yes. So this one, in a government paper, a paragraph stated that the RPA retained the right to withdraw payments for actions that were considered normalised. Is there a risk that environmental payments will cease once there is an expectation that farmers undertake this work as a matter of course?
Thank you, Sophie. That's really interesting. I think just to put on a perspective from what we've done at Hope Farm, there are some things that to start off with, they do cost us money. And then as time goes on, they either cost us very little or actually add additional value to the farm. Soil management, cover crops, addition of organic matter and drainage and those kind of things, they all cost money and investment, but they do pay out long term. And then there are habitats that may take a lot to get established, but once they're there, they are providing a lot of other ecosystem services. So from my perspective, it's perhaps not clear cut. It's a really tricky question to answer. So that's why at that point, I'm going to hand it over to the speakers. Sorry, I should have directed it to someone.
I was only going to say very quickly, so to give Martin a chance, but I think it's it would be a down to kind of value for money, and you know, if there are some basic aspects that are initially paid for through the sustainable farming incentive, I think it is entirely appropriate that eventually they're removed. But I think it's about being upfront. I think DEFRA need to be upfront and map out a trajectory. So if there are aspects that, you know, they kind of get you in and encourage you to take them up, be really clear that it is about ramping up and that the ambition will change over time and that some things might not be paid for. But there are lots of actions that should always be paid for, because, you know, they are delivering great value for money, and we want to provide incentives for farmers to continue to do that, as they are, you know, trying to make money. It is a business, so trying to make sure that there's a good blend of private and public money coming in is appropriate there.
Thank you, Anna.
It's about that journey clearly mapped out. We know that the initial part of SFI may be paying farmers to get themselves up to a standard, because some of them are below that. But it's that journey beyond that. You can't pay farmers to meet a regulated standard. That's going to be part of your business, and you have to accept that as a farmer. And it's additionality that the public get reward for, of that delivery as a farmer can deliver.
Thank you, Martin. And Chris, would you like to put a closing comment on that?
Very quickly, comparing it with farming with other sectors, we don't pay other sectors to just obey the law. There's no reason why we should pay farmers to do so. But there aren't many other sectors where we expect the business to go out of their way to deliver public benefits. Farming is pretty much the only one. So of course they need some reward for doing so, because they're not going to get that through their core activity of producing food.
Thank you. I am sorry to say that we will have to wrap it up there, but I hope with the Q&A session we've had and just the introduction into this topic, which I think we can only hope in an hour that is what it can be, from the three speakers, it's given an idea of where policy is going, where we would like it to go, perhaps also some shortfalls on where we think it could do better as well, and hopefully some direction to farmers out there, how they may be able to plan and look to their business for opportunities. So with that, it is also with some sadness in a way that we are wrapping up the final webinar in our series. You can catch these webinars or ones that you've missed on the Farm Wildlife YouTube channel. And we are also, Sophie here, I have to give Sophie the credit for writing these blogs that are giving also written summaries of what's going on. So please do take a read of those on the RSPB farming blog. Thanks also goes to all of the organisations outside of the RSPB and departments within the RSPB who've made this happen and made it possible. Farmers who have provided their case studies for wildlife friendly farming practices, butterfly conservation, farm wildlife for not just providing their help in organising, but also the platform to host the recordings of these webinars, and their staff and volunteers for helping to share the news that it's going on. Agri, Oakbank Seeds, UKCH National Trust, and other pioneering farmers who are part of the Ely Nature Friendly Farming Zone. And of course, Chris today from the Rare Breed Survival Trust and Martin from the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Thank you to all of you for your time. And then those within the RSPB. So Alice from the Policy Department, Conservation and Agricultural Advisors, Sophie, Rebecca, who has been behind the scenes from the events team, and also to Fair to Nature as well for offering your input on what Fair to Nature is and how that could provide extra value to wildlife friendly food for farmers. And with that, I will be finishing the webinar.